It is another Fight Island card, and I'm really looking forward to this one because we have a lot of fights that are probably going to fly under the radar, including this contest at 155 pounds. We have Jessin Ayari making their return. Mr. Abacus representing Germany, taking on the Italian stallion, Luigi Vendramini. Matt, what can I say here? I mean, for Luigi Vendramini, stepped in on short notice in the place of Bilal Muhammad. And I say short notice. It was really short notice. Up a weight class, taking on one of your favorite fighters, Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos. And really gave a pretty good account of himself. Now, I know if you just look at the fact that, yeah, he got knocked out against Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos, you might think, oh, well, this guy's trash. He's no good. He's a young guy. The record was padded. Maybe it was. But overall, wasn't that bad. I mean, striking wasn't up to snuff, but it's hard to look good in terms of striking against Capoeira. But the spot where Luigi Vendramini shone was the fact that he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and some of the things that he was able to do when he was pressuring, trying to implement his wrestling, and the fact that he was able to scramble like a spider monkey to the back of Eliseo and stick in a pretty tight, it was a bit of a neck crank, then it was a rear naked. Zaleski get out of it. The other thing that happened at the start of that fight, if you go back and watch, Zaleski had a Peruvian necktie, and it was in tight. It's a submission that you don't often see in MMA. Vendramini able to get out of that one. He's training at a Factory X for this fight. Now, I know if you watch before the fight against Zaleski, he was with Team Alpha Male. He's made the move over with Mark Montoya. So, I mean, think of the people that he has in his corner. You're talking the Alexander Hernandez's, the Yusuf Salal's, and Brandon Royval, who we saw this past week. Lyman Good's another one, too. So overall, Luigi Vendramini, you know the jiu-jitsu is good. The striking's probably going to improve. I mean, this is a guy that made his debut about 2 years ago, so he's 22 at the time. You can only go up from there, and I think when you already have that base of jiu-jitsu, the sky's the limit for a younger guy like this. So you take your lumps, your first fight there. He's been off for quite some time, bit of a knee injury, and as you can see, that fight at 70 his last time out, moving down to 55 and taking on Jessin Ayari. And this is a fighter that you might recognize. I mean, came into the UFC, had a big win in his debut over Jim Wallhead, and then after that, he took on Darren Till. Now, Darren Till weighed 176 pounds in that fight, beat him handily. So Ayari comes back out, moves down to 55, his first fight at lightweight against Stevie Ray. And Matt, I'm going to let you take over because that fight wasn't entirely close. Jessin Ayari won the fight, and I mean close because Stevie Ray should have won the fight.
So remember when Dominic Reyes beat John Jones? But it just so happened that the three judges thought that John Jones beat Dominic Reyes there on that night. That fight was kind of similar because I thought at the end of that fight, Jessin Ayari not only beat Stevie Ray, he probably 30-27'd him, and then the judges' scorecard.
So I'm going to have a look at the score. So again, Jessin Ayari won that fight, lost that fight, should have won it. If you go over to MMA decisions, you had one total voter going 29-28 Ray. You had 7 voters going 29-28 Ayari, and 4 scored at 30-27 Ayari. And if you go back and watch that fight, Stevie Ray was working. He was kind of pushing the pace on Ayari. He was throwing a lot of nice kicks, but every time Ayari found success, he was rushing in. He'd throw a nice combination 1-2, a little bit of whip on the end of his strikes, and he looked really good. It's just, apparently in the mind of the judges, that didn't translate to points.
That fight, it really felt like Jessin Ayari was able to use his movement, and the fact that he wasn't always moving forward, every time they would get into some sort of an exchange, Ayari would land the heavier shots on Stevie Ray, but it was just the fact that Stevie Ray seemed like he was walking forward the majority of the fight. Maybe that could have swayed the judges, but when you actually watch who won the overall, Ayari won, and I didn't think it was very close. I thought his striking looked really good in that fight, and it kind of evolved in that fight too. He took kind of the Henry Cejudo in the Sergio Pettis fight kind of stretch where it's like, oh, he used to fight like this, now he fights like this. He's got this open stance and kind of that more karate-esque style. And I thought it worked really well for him. Now, of course, he didn't get the result that I'm sure he was hoping for, but if we see that level of striking continue to improve, not saying he's going to be the next Henry Cejudo by any means, but if he can get kind of that karate-esque style with the footwork, I think this could be a nightmare for Vendramini to try to get him down to the ground, because if you are that really versatile guy who can land a couple shots, then move on the outside, just kind of probe with your jab and whatnot, it's going to be really hard to get taken down by a guy who's not a high-level wrestler. Now, with Vendramini, if it does go to the ground, he can finish it with submissions a lot better than most high-level wrestlers can. But it's just the fact that I don't know if his wrestling is good enough to get the fight to where his strength really lies. So I think Ayari might be able to run away with this one.
And with Jessin Ayari, I mean, a background, a little bit of sambo, a little bit of kickboxing. Matt all of a sudden comparing Jessin Ayari 1 and 2 in the UFC to Henry Cejudo. Who knows what could happen? But overall, pretty well rounded there. He will switch his stances quite a bit. You'd think he'd throw a nice low kick, and I remember watching that Stevie Ray fight where they talked about his low kick. He throws it at very low percentages. It's not something that we see all that much, and that's one of those things that it seems like every fight out, somebody will mention, oh boy, the low kick. Hey, that's pretty cool. But I mean, in terms of this fight, BJJ brown belt for Ayari, like I said, black belt for Vendramini, training with one of the better gyms that you could be at this point. In terms of the odds, they have shifted. Ayari -115, Vendramini -110. Vendramini open a -175 favorite. Ayari open the +135 underdog. If you look over on Tapology at a 636 votes, 71% going with Vendramini, 47% saying he's going to win by knockout, 40% saying he can win by decision. I think that's a little odd, Matt, and this is one of the more pick'em type of fights. It's actually on the card that it's pretty well tough to call because Ayari's been out since, and I insert the clip here, if you're coming to Moncton, UFC Moncton, the first UFC card we ever covered as Fight Night Picks, that was Jessin Ayari's last time out. For Luigi Vendramini, it was the same month 2 years ago, the last time we saw him. So it's really tough to tell how they progressed. Both guys have actually had separate knee injuries, so that's pretty interesting. So it's tough to tell exactly what you're going to get. With Jessin Ayari, like you said, nice combinations, nice pop on his shots. It's not like it's translated to big knockout wins or anything, but he was on quite a win streak, 6-fight win streak coming into the UFC. Then he beat Wallhead. So, I mean, you know, the sky was the limit. And for Vendramini, he was 8-0, but the competition wasn't really the best. He was, however, finishing the majority of them quite quickly. I like Luigi Vendramini here. I like, you know, he was a decent favorite. That line shifted quite a bit on Ayari. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if Ayari's able to win on points because he is definitely going to be the bigger fighter in there. But I do like the upside for Luigi Vendramini. And I think if he can close the distance, really wear on Ayari, he should be able to force a takedown and get a submission here.
I mean, this really will come down. It's going to be a story of two different fights. Either Vendramini gets the fight to the ground and does win by submission, or Ayari is able to kind of work on the outside, point his way to a decision. I think the decision for Ayari is the more likely of the outcomes, but like Craig said, I can kind of see it going either way.
Matt, you beat me last weekend. You've got Jessin Ayari here. I'm going with the Brazilian Italian stallion, Luigi Vendramini. Really looking forward to this card. We've got a great main event. We're going to take an extended look at it. Bantamweight title hopes on the line. Holm taking on Irena Aldana. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it. This is actually one of my favorite fights on the card. At 135 pounds, we have Kenney taking on Alateng Heili. And Matt, by now, if you don't know who Kenney is, give yourself a pat on the back. No, I'm just kidding. Give yourself a slap in the face. You gotta know this guy. He's 3-1 in the UFC, and he's 7-1 since losing on the first season of Contender Series. Since then, picked up the LFA interim flyweight belt over Brandon Royval, who's highly ranked in the flyweight division these days. And he won their interim bantamweight title over Vince Cachero, who's also in the UFC now. I know he didn't look good against Jamal Emmers, but that kind of stuff happens. But for Kenney, I mean, what can I say? His striking's efficient. His grappling's efficient. I can get into the numbers. If he didn't lose that fight against Merab Dvalishvili, maybe there'd be a number next to his name because you have Merab Dvalishvili ranked 13th right now at bantamweight. I gotta talk about this. I mean, Marlon Vera's ranked 15th. Give your friggin' head a shake. Come on! But for Kenney, like I said, you've got Merab at 13. There's a chance with a win here to at least get really close to those top 15 rankings. And in terms of the efficiency, that's where I want to go with this because you look at it, his takedown defense stat might not be the very best at 53%. Listen, in the fight that he had against Ray Borg went 7 of 10 of his takedowns. Merab Dvalishvili went 12 of 24. That's insane. But Kenney still has halfway decent takedown defense. Takedown offense, not too bad at about 50%. And that's where I think this fight could be a total scramble fest. If it's going to be on the feet, I mean, let the cat out of the bag a little bit. Alateng Heili has really nice pop at the end of his shots, and he can throw a really sneaky hook in at the end. We saw that happen in his first fight.
He definitely has the more power out of the two.
He had that happen in his first fight against Dana Bakgaril. And in his last fight, maybe it wasn't as good as the Bakgaril fight. I know it was a unanimous. It was 29-27 across the board. He won the last round 10-8. His gas tanks come into question before, and I know his record's saltier with 5 more losses than that of Kenney. But Alateng, more popping of shots. Kenney, you might see a little bit more volume. We can break it down into the numbers more. But for Alateng, I mean, this is a guy that maybe you're not overly familiar with him. And the fact that his grappling is also quite good, that's what makes this fight so interesting. What do you like about this one?
Kenney's a guy who I'm really high on, I'll be honest. And like you had mentioned, that win over Brandon Royval is aging like a fine wine. Because as Royval's going out there, he's not just like beating people in the flyweight division. He's putting it on them and having exciting fights. And you kind of need guys like that in that division. That's not that the division's on life support, because there's been a little bit of a resurgence, but there's only, 15 guys in the division? Like, every win you get moves you up the rankings pretty much. Kenney's a frustrating fighter because he can do everything. And I think those takedown defense stats are a little bit misleading just because he's so good at scrambling and he is such a good grappler. He doesn't mind giving up the takedown sometimes because it does give him the opportunity to then get into a scramble, to end up on top. In the Ray Borg fight, that happened a lot where Ray Borg would initiate the takedown, he'd just kind of go with it, and then they'd scramble and he'd end up in top position. So it does work out for him. But then again, in the fight like the Merab Dvalishvili fight, Merab's just such a good and overpowering wrestler that you could try to sort of concede the takedown, but when a guy's so strong and so good at controlling you, like a fighter Merab is, there's not much you can do about it at that point. He's going to hold you down, he's going to beat you up. That's just kind of what his style is, going to be your kryptonite. Alateng doesn't have that kind of wrestling. He has very good wrestling and very good grappling, but I see it as a case where if he is initiating the takedowns, Kenney is going to be comfortable giving up some of those takedowns. He won't really defend and waste a lot of energy, putting a lot of his energy into the takedown defense, just because once the fight hits the mat, that's when this fight's going to get exciting. That is when Kenney's going to try to scramble, and then we'll see how Alateng can respond to it, because we know how good Kenney can scramble and can grapple with those upper echelon guys. Yes, didn't work out in the Merab fight, but for the most part throughout his UFC tenure, it's really worked out for him. And I know what I'm going to get with Kenney. With Alateng, there is a few question marks. I do like the power in his striking, and his wrestling is quite good, but there's so many more things I know that I'm going to get with Kenney than I do with Alateng.
With Alateng, and we talk about this with a lot of fighters, you might be 14-7 to this point, but it all depends on the competition that you've taken down. So for Alateng, in his second pro fight, it was his first pro loss in 2013. It was against Sung Yadong on the regional scene. So that's a pretty good name. Alateng's last loss was by first round knockout, very early in the first round with Road FC back in 2017 against Kaya Sakura. And if you don't know who Kaya Sakura is, go watch some Ryzen because that guy's insane. So for Alateng, he has taken on some good competition. And even in some of the losses against some of the lesser competition, you definitely have an opportunity to learn from it. And we've seen that in his first two performances in the UFC. The one against Danabak Gorel, really interesting fight, really entertaining fight. It was actually the fight of the night on that card. And then in his last one against Ryan Benoit, won it by split decision, but the majority of fans and voters had it for Alateng in that one. His takedowns are on point. He has a really nice, tight overhand, right? You see a lot of looping shots. Remember the Chuck Liddell Iceman overhand, right? It was all over the place. It was like a nice baseball swing. But for Haile Alateng, he holds his hand in closer to his body, and it's almost like he masks it a little bit and throws it in, but you would mention it like Jan Blachowicz. Alateng has a lot of power on that shot. So let's get into the odds because they have shifted quite a bit since they opened. Kenney's a minus 300 favorite in this one. Open is a minus 220. For Alateng, sitting at a plus 240. Open is a plus 185. If you look over on Tapology, to 719 votes, 92% going Kenney, 71% going by decision. I think you people are insane. I think maybe you've never seen an Alateng fight in your life, because those odds to me are way too skewed when you have two guys that can grapple like these two can, and you have the power of Alateng. I think that the odds should be closer to maybe like a 2-1 where they open roughly. 3-1 seems to me a little bit insane. It seems like a lot of people are very high on Kenney, and I think you got to give props to the Chinese fighter, the Mongolian Knight from Inner Mongolia here, because he's going to make this one the interesting fight.
He will, but I gotta be honest, I'm not gonna make a hipster pick by any means. I think Kenney's got this by decision. He has an answer for almost any question that you can give him in an MMA fight. If you're a really good striker with great takedown defense, he doesn't mind striking with you, playing that volume game, and then working his takedowns into it. If you're a really good wrestler, he's not afraid to stuff your takedowns, force you to strike, and then scramble. He can kind of do a little bit of everything. My super hot take, not that it's really a hot take or that I'm trying to make one, he's a very poor man's version of Alexander Volkanovski. Like, he can just kind of get it done no matter where the fight is, and that his game plan's a really important component to it. He's more wrestling heavy, don't get me wrong, but just no matter who his opponent is or what the fight is, you know what you're going to get for Casey Kenney.
And I know this fight will never happen, but the perfect fight in the perfect world would be Casey Kenney against JBC, Junior Bacon Cheeseburger, Jeremy Kennedy. I think that fight actually would be quite good, but again, Kennedy's kind of been all over the map here since he left the UFC. Either way, I have to side with Casey Kenney as well. I just do think that you have to give props to Heili Alateng. It just hasn't happened this week. But again, Casey Kenney seemed to have the answer. I think he might have fought a bit of a tougher opponent, and it sucks because Luis Smolka had a lot of success at 25. But at 35, he's been good too. And we talked a lot about that fight, but that submission looked amazing. Okay. The fight against Merab was halfway competitive. And throughout the win streak that he had before that Merab fight, those fights went swimmingly, really, for Casey Kenney. So, Matt, both agreeing with Casey Kenney here. I think this fight has a ton of potential. You're not going to miss the rest of the picks on the card, including extended look and our main event between Holm and Irena Aldana. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it. We have a really interesting fight on this card, and it would be better suited for a Ryzen, a one-off in Bellator, maybe even Invicta, probably Invicta, because these two are atomweights. We have Loma Lookboonmee taking on Jinh Frey. And Matt, since Loma's came into the UFC, 1-1 so far, big win over Alexandra Albu. And then after that, she fought Angela Hill, which was kind of weird. Stuff. And it was a really weird fight because we got so much hate on this channel because I said that Angela Hill was going to out Muay Thai an incredible Muay Thai artist. And listen, I get it. It happened, though, and Angela Hill beat Loma Lookboonmee quite badly. But to backtrack a little bit, Loma, a sponsored fighter from Tiger Muay Thai, a Hickman protege, if you will. You're probably going to have Frank and George in her corner. And she's got over 100 Muay Thai fights. You know exactly what you're going to get with her. The best part of her game is her clinch work, her elbows and her knees. They're amazing, especially for a smaller fighter. And the reason why I say it's a shame, because I really do think if you had a UFC atomweight division, you have Loma, you have Frey, you have Michelle Waterson, and so on and so forth. You could really build a nice stable. It's just a shame that they don't. We have to have this fight at strawweight. And for Jinh Frey, coming into the UFC, she had another fight against Ashley Cummins where she won, and she became, once again, the Invicta FC atomweight champ. She comes into the UFC, takes on Kay Hansen. A lot of people really high on Hansen as a prospect. Frey had some success. I mean, she throws from southpaw. She's got a really nice left hand, but it's more 1-2 shots than combinations. A lot of people are high on her clinch work, actually. Didn't quite work out for her. She was able to stuff the takedowns. I know her corner after the first round of that fight said she was winning. If she won that first round, she didn't win after that. She ended up getting submitted in that one. So again, for Loma, representing a nice gym. For Jinh Frey, also representing a pretty good gym. In Fortis MMA, she's going to have Cheyenne Buys in her corner, in and around her anyway. They've been main training partners for this one. Cheyenne getting a big win on Contender Series. She's in the UFC. JP, when are you getting into the UFC, man? But in terms of this fight, I think it's interesting because you have two fighters really not meant for 15, but we get them at 15. You have a really good striker in Loma Lookboonmee. Clinch works great. Jinh Frey, just a totally different fighter. So it's not necessarily the biggest clash of styles. It's not one of those striker versus grappler. But it is two different type of strikers. What do you make of this one here?
It's an interesting fight. I do like the matchup because, like you had mentioned, this should be an atomweight fight. It's just we're getting it at strawweight. So I think Loma Lookboonmee's power and her striking will translate a lot better in this fight than it did in the Angela Hill fight, because Angela Hill, she's big for a strawweight fighter, and frame-wise too, quite a bit better than Lookboonmee. So her power will translate better against Frey, just because Frey much, much smaller than Angela Hill is, and she will play that striking game. For Jinh Frey, though, in her last fight against Kay Hansen, you got to think, Frey coming over from Invicta, she was their atomweight champion, she was scheduled for a title defense, and then she comes over to the UFC to fight another Invicta fighter who wasn't really at the top of the division at strawweight, and she lost in that fight. I thought she was probably going to get the win. I thought she beat Kay Hansen because we have the champion who's smaller versus the contender who's younger, but they're a little bit bigger. Frey won't really have that excuse in this fight because she'll actually be the bigger of the two. And not to really steal John Anik's quote that he says before every single fight on UFC 4, because there's very limited amount of voice lines in that game.
This is brought to you by P3?
Not brought to you by P3, nor Modelo Especial, but This is really a striker versus an MMA fighter, and that was kind of what you were alluding to. It's not a strikers matchup as much as it is a striker versus an MMA fighter who prefers to strike. If Frey is able to get the takedown, we kind of saw in the Angela Hill fight, Lookboonmee not phenomenal on the ground. I think Lookboonmee will be able to defend the takedowns, kind of force the striking out of Frey. And then from there on, it comes down to, is the boxing of Frey going to be able to get inside on Lookboonmee and kind of damage her with some of those elbows? Or can Lookboonmee stay on the outside, use her leg kicks, just kind of work her kicking game as a whole, and when the fight does close distance, start using her elbows, go to the body. I don't think we're going to see a stoppage by any gal. Again, two of the smaller athletes in the UFC. I favor Lookboonmee striking because Frey, she's not a good enough wrestler, I don't think, to really go out there and chase that takedown if she really needs it. Lookboonmee, if you can just kind of stick to the script, throw leg kicks, throw calf kicks, try to use your jab and move, you should be able to get it done.
And it is an interesting fight, like you had said, and I gotta lay my cards on the table. I say that before every single one of these fights,
That's true.
just to
He
get
doesn't
myself.
always mean it, though.
I get myself pumped up. This is actually an interesting one because where do you go from here with a win? Really, I mean, you're always going to be fighting much bigger competition. Loma coming into the UFC at 3-1 just seemed absolutely insane. It really did, and I get the pedigree and the lineage and the fact that she was actually the first Thai fighter signed to the UFC, if you can believe that. It's pretty interesting stuff. And for Jinh Frey, she's fought a who's who of competition coming up through. I know the record might not be the best. She's fought Seo Hee Ham, who didn't have a great run in the UFC, but overseas, really big deal. And she's fought Ayaka Hamasaki twice. One time lost, second time lost, but still, you fought some really, really good competition. So where the odds lie, you've got Loma Lookboonmee a minus 135 favorite. She opened, they were pick'em odds, so they have shifted towards Lookboonmee. For Jinh Frey at plus 110 right now. Over on Tapology, the votes are pretty close at a 734, 57% going with Frey, 85% saying she's going to win by decision. So here's how I see it playing out. Again, you got the striker that's good in the clinch in Lookboonmee. You get Jinh Frey that's also pretty good in the clinch. Might have the better wrestling because you're facing pretty well a pure striker. I mean, again, you got the Hickman brothers. Good wrestling coach right there, Frank. But yeah, I mean, Frey, she can do a lot of nice things. It's just I don't see the volume of striking from her. And if you're going to win a decision against Lookboonmee, you got to clinch in the open space. You got to try and take the fight to the mat. I don't really see that happening in this one. So I'm just ever so slightly going to side with Loma Lookboonmee. And I'm going to have to watch a lot more tape study during this week to get ready for Fight Night Picks kicks. Matt's going to be there as well.
Spoiler
Matt,
alert.
who are you going with in this one?
I agree. I think Lookboonmee is going to be able to get it done. Not take anything away from Frey's title run over in Invicta, but I was never overly impressed by her because you never saw her as a champ and thought, wow, she's going to beat every contender. And not that you say that about every champion, but when you look at the champion of a division, you always want to be confident that they're at least going to stay there for the next few fights. And with Frey, it kind of felt like they were setting her up to lose. She was one of the bigger faces, I guess, of the organization, if you will, especially after Megan Anderson had first got signed over to the UFC. But I just think Lookboonmee striking seems to be a little bit too much for her, and I don't think Frey has the grappling acumen to really make Lookboonmee pay if she just kind of get overexcited with her strikes and start to overextend.
Matt, I'm really looking forward to this. Both of us going with Loma Lookboonmee to get the win. You're going to want to keep it locked in for this entire card. I mean, think about it. Carlos Condit, Court McGee, and at the top, you've got Holm taking on Irena Aldana. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. There's a lot of really interesting fights on this card, Matt. And at 185 pounds, we have two UFC debuts. And you might be more familiar with the fighter on the left than you are with the fighter on the right. And that's because Jordan Williams, out of his last 4 fights, 3 of them were on Contender Series. He's won 1 and 1 no contest, which is crazy to think of. And maybe if the first fight went a little bit differently where he knocked out Tim Karen, if he didn't test positive for the weed, then maybe we would have seen him in the UFC a little bit sooner. So
weed.
Jordan Williams, he lost on the last season of Contender Series, 2019, lost by split decision. Then he comes back out, waits. There were bouts that he was supposed to have, one against KB Buller up in Canada with Unified. Buller, you're going to see next week against Tom Breeze, stepping in on somewhat short a notice for Roman Kopylov. But Jordan Williams, we saw him this past time out against a really tough fighter, jiu-jitsu fighter, and Gregory Rodriguez. And it looked like a welterweight fighting a light heavyweight. Jordan Williams was so much smaller than Rodriguez. They stood, they traded, Rodriguez went for some head kicks, and at the end, Jordan Williams finished that fight with a combo that Matt said was reminiscent of the time that the New York badass, Phil Baroni, knocked out Dave Mene. Remember Dave Mene? Cool tattoos. That was an awesome fight, and it's a highlight that I've always liked to go back and watch all the time. Phil Baroni. But in terms of this fight, Jordan Williams, I mean, 9-3 with the 1-0 contest. There's two really problematic losses that I have, and I'll dispel the myth of, oh, well, he's been knocked out before, so it could happen again. The first fight was against Kazula Vargas at 170 pounds. Vargas actually looked like a mammoth of a man. Now, I know, in the UFC, it hasn't looked great for Kazula Vargas, but the kid was bodied up, fighting for good old Tachi PF, the one in Lemoore, California. And in that fight, he caught Jordan Williams. He threw a nice high kick and threw a nice hook after that. It opened up a cut on Williams. Williams ended the round decently, but then at the very end, doctor stoppage due to that cut. So Vargas gets the win. Then he fought Dwight Grant, and he got knocked out cold in the fight against Grant. Now, Grant, you might know in the UFC at 85, but at the time, that fight was at 70. So for Jordan Williams, since he's moved up to 85, and it was after that fight against Dwight Grant, he took 2 years off. He's still a young guy. Took 2 years off, moves up to 85, and then since then, pretty well leveled off with a 1 split decision loss on his record since. That's Jordan Williams in a nutshell. Nassourdine Imavov is one of my favorite prospects that hasn't been in the UFC. Trains with a great gym, MMA Factory, over in France. A lot of people figured that we'd see Imavov if the UFC ended up having a show in France where MMA is now legalized. But we get him here, and I couldn't be more excited. I mean, Nassourdine Imavov with the Ferdinand Lopez team. I mean, you've seen Cyril Gane. He's got a big fight coming up against Anche Delia, but also obviously Francis Ngannou coming out of there as well. So for Imavov, in one of the, not lower weight classes, but lower than those two, we get a guy that has a nickname, the Sniper, and his striking is absolutely on point. Nice low kicks, but it's the combos that he sets up with his hands. Takedown defense, little salty. In his last time out, Aris FC, the first card, he took on Jonathan Meunier, and I mean, Robin Black described it best in that fight.
And see how he sort of swims through fighting? He flows through it.
And you might recognize Meunier from his time with the UFC. Had a loss to Colby Covington on short notice, stepped in for a teammate there, lost that fight. That's going to happen. And then his next time out won. And then when the UFC switched hands and went over to WME IMG, they canceled his contract because he had brain surgery in 2010. Now, that's enough about Meunier. But the fact is, he was a UFC caliber fighter. He was 1-1 at the time. And yeah, maybe the results haven't been all that great. And Meunier hasn't come out since that Imavov loss. But he's one of those great guys at TriStar that's still highly regarded as a good fighter at 185 pounds. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. We saw how good Imavov was. We saw once he hit Meunier with almost a kill shot and had Meunier rocked, he was able to follow it up and really land clean and finish that fight. Same thing for Jordan Williams in his last time out. I love the matchmaking. I think it's actually perfect. And the really interesting thing, Imavov was actually supposed to fight Rodriguez on Contender Series, but pulled out. So Jordan Williams got that fight and got himself a contract. Imavov didn't even have to fight on Contender Series to get a contract. So Matt, I'm really looking forward to this one. The last thing I want to say about Williams, he trains at a NorCal Fighting Alliance under David Terrell. You might remember David Terrell from fighting Evan Tanner for the UFC's middleweight championship back in 2005. I've gone through everybody's history. Matt, you were born in 1998.
I was.
Do you want your stat line too? We'll leave it out. I love this fight. Take over from here.
So Jordan Williams in his last fight against Rodriguez on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series would have lost Imavov if he was fighting him that night. I know that's a bit of a riddle right there, but Jordan Williams was so hittable on that night, it wasn't even funny. He had that kind of first run of Justin Gaethje style in him where it was just, I'm just going to keep on walking forward like this. I'm going to get hit with some shots. I'm going to return some. And he has good power, but it's against a guy like Imavov, who throws straight punches, who can kind of work with the hands in the clinch if Williams is just keep on kind of going forward. I think the takedown threat of Imavov is going to give Williams a big problem. And then on the feet, I think the accuracy, I think the power of Imavov can mess with Jordan Williams. If Jordan Williams can stay on the outside, land power, low kicks, really work the body of Imavov, wear him down to the point where you don't really have to worry about the wrestling. You don't really have to worry about all of his other skills, even though he's known more as a striker. But if you don't have to worry about the takedowns, it's just really going to open up your own striking game. But Imavov, it's weird. He's the bigger guy. You'd think the stronger guy. He's got the better wrestling. He's got the better striking skills, I would say, even though Williams might hit a little bit harder. But just the fact that Williams walks right into danger, and not in a positive way either. Not in a way where, okay, he can slip a few shots and then land power. He's going to eat those shots too close to the distance, and that's going to worry me in pretty much any fight he ever has in the UFC.
And that's the trouble. Like, he's had these good showings on Contender Series, the Karen fight, the fight against Rodriguez. But, I mean, the knockout losses, and I get it. You know, you move from 70 to 185. It was kind of like, and this is a poor example. That's what I was going to say. Kama-worthy. When he was at 45, he was losing by knockout. He moves up to 55. Went on that great run before he fought Otmar Zaitar. Yeah, I ate my words there. But he wasn't getting knocked out as much. But for Jordan Williams, those fights at 70, he's still fighting like that. Like, he took that time off, moved up to 85. But he can withstand a lot of damage and give more of his own. Oh, yeah. That's the trouble against a guy like Imavov. Like, a guy that's 24 years old. So 8-2. What's that record mean to you? Well, his pro debut, he fought a guy that was 7-2. Lost that fight, because that's going to happen. And then his other loss, and this was a while ago, back in 2017, was against Michael Michalski, that you might recognize from his pretty high-profile fights with KSW. So Imavov's fought maybe not the best competition, and yes, he's lost to decent fighters. I think at this point in his career, he's one of those young guys that with a win over Jordan Williams, automatically you're going to get a bit of the U.S. audience if he's able to win, and just continue from there. And I think he has a really good chance at 85 to make a little bit of noise. I'm kind of giving it away here, but Williams to this point is the favorite, minus 150. But he opened as a minus 215 favorite. So the money's coming in on Imavov, who's now plus 125 underdog, open plus 165. Over on Tapology at 653 votes. 53% going Williams, 73% saying he's going to win by knockout. The one thing I do want to say before the picks, Imavov in that Mounier fight did get hit a fair bit. It was when he was on his back foot, he'd get hit by a jab straight down the middle. So that's a little bit worrying when you move up against the more technical strikers. Overall, I'm going to put cards on the table here. I've got Imavov to get the win. I think this is a possible performance of the night because Williams definitely has a shot in this one. He throws really good hard punches. And if he's able to back up Imavov, holy smokes, there's a good opportunity for a Williams win. I just think Imavov's the more technical striker. And when we're talking technique versus looping shots, it's usually the tactician that gets the win. I'm going Imavov here.
Yeah, Imavov should be able to get it done. You're dealing with a guy who is just, he's kind of better at everything at this point in his career. The threat of getting knocked out from Jordan Williams is there. Williams has big power, and they both kind of have that. We're just going to go forward to see which one falls. So it should be a very entertaining fight for as long as it lasts. But yeah, I'm going with Imavov. I'm not as high as him, or on him as Craig is. Craig's putting that Craig White stamp onto his name, but I do think he should be able to get the win, hopefully move up the ranks a little bit in the near future.
Matt, I'm really looking forward to this fight. Both of us going with Nassourdine Imavov to bring the win back to France. And Matt, I'm really looking forward to this card. You got a featured prelim headliner in Court McGee and Carlos Condit. You've also got a great main event between Holm and Irena Aldana at the top of the bantamweight ranks. So you're not going to want to miss those. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Really interesting fight, Matt, at featherweight between Canada's own, Quebec's own, Charles Jourdain. We're talking Jourdain. And Matt, a lot of people really high on him from his win over Doo-Ho Choi over in Korea. I mean, you had the hometown guy, Choi, fighting actually at home in Busan. And Charles Jourdain went out there and finished him. And it was an amazing win for him. Now, before that, a loss to Desmond Green up at 55. And Josh Culibao can certainly understand that from his last fight. Short notice UFC debut. He was taking on Jalen Turner. He got absolutely obliterated in that fight. I mean, the total strikes were 90 for Turner to 12 for Culibao. And Culibao was a featherweight. Really was. I mean, former Hex champ and Super Fight Series champ there in Australia. So he came in. You get the contract anyway, probably not going to win, and Turner was a much bigger fighter, much more adept in the striking. But Culibao, I mean, what can he do well? Really nice counters. He's decent off the back foot, and his footwork actually is quite good. We saw that more on the regional scene, obviously, than we did in his last time out. For Jourdain, in his last time, it was Andre Fili in a fight that he lost by split decision. It was close. I definitely saw it for Fili. I think I maybe had predicted Jourdain, but Fili put on a good account of himself. And you know when you get Andre Fili, you get a guy that's a Swiss Army knife, really well-rounded, and a guy that's represented Team Alpha Male for the longest time. And I remember the comments under that video. A lot of people were critical of Jourdain. He was in the States. He wasn't home in Canada. How, concentrated was he on his training? I can tell you this, and again, I don't look into the thirst trap that is Instagram because you never get the real picture. But Charles Jourdain before this fight looks like a picture of fitness, and he actually has been training in Quebec at Sherbatov Gym. You might know Yoni Sherbatov. It's his gym. And Jourdain's look great there. You know from his fight style that friggin' leg kick, holy smokes, his left leg is on fire. It's like and I've said it before in these predictions, it's like the overhand right from Chuck Liddell. It's like name your fighter and their signature move. Charles Jourdain, it's that back low kick. He can throw it low, he can throw it to the body, he can throw it to the head. So it's not necessarily a low kick, but his left leg is on fire. It's in fuego. And that's what you're going to get out of Jourdain. With Culibao, now that you get him at 45 in a full camp, you're going to get to see a more well-rounded fighter. I'm looking forward to this because I don't see it really going to the ground. What do you think about this one?
I think it's a fun fight, but I'm going to be honest, really let the cat out of the bag early. I don't know how Jourdain loses this fight. You're dealing with a guy who struggles with strikers in Culibao and struggles with strikers who have huge power, and that's what Jourdain does. Also, shout out, I think Air Jourdain, great nickname. I think it's kind of good, sort of creative, so check mark on that. But we saw in the Doo Ho Choi fight, he got dropped early on in that fight, and you thought, oh, well, things are going to go from bad to worse. We know what Doo Ho Choi brings. He's got great power, good boxing, you know the rest. And for him to really fight back in that fight, get up off the canvas, work his way back into it, and then not only beat, but to stop the Korean Superboy. Now, yes, he had been off for a little while. He had lost a couple in a row before that, but still, that's a guy who his skill level and his ceiling is quite high, I still believe. And for Jourdain and his second UFC fight to go to that man's hometown and knock him out is very impressive. So if you're able to do that, and then if you're able to fight to a close fight, and I agree with you, I didn't have him winning that Fili fight. It was a close fight, but I thought Fili had done enough to win it. So you're competitive with a guy like Andre Fili, and you beat a guy like Doo Ho Choi. You're going to be able to beat a guy like Josh Culibao. I'm not bringing back my lock of the week because it always means that guy's going to lose. But this is as close to a lock as I'm willing to give on this card.
Yikes, Matt. You're going to get hate in the comments.
That's
pat
fine.
yourself on the back. But, I mean, with Charles Jourdain, you're going to get people that are going to say, well, he lost to TJ Laramie on the regional scene. All right. Well, he beat Alex Morgan, who beat TJ Laramie twice. So there's that. I mean, those TKO fights don't mean a whole lot other than maybe some of the wins that you can accentuate. But you're fighting Desmond Green, circumstances around him now not great, but you're having a halfway competitive fight at 55. I know Green just took over with his wrestling in that one. Then you're knocking out Doo Ho Choi at home in a big spot, and then you're losing a close fight to Andre Fili.
He's a young guy at 24. Like, he's younger than Craig, so he's going to get better between every single fight. He's going to improve constantly between every performance. So the version that we have already that has already beat Doo Ho Choi and that has already fought a competitive fight with Fili is just going to keep on improving every fight.
So all of that shine to Jourdain, and if you have a look at Josh Culibao, I mean, he was finishing opponents on the regional scene. Decent records. I mean, Adolfo Marx at the time, 25-10-1, and I'm not going to go through the guys that he fought because they probably weren't all that great, but a lot of good wins. He switched up camps in the past. He used to be at Australian top team, Mokhtarian brothers from there. He's now with a different gym, and I went through and had a look at some of the training partners. With Igor MMA in Sydney, Jamie Mullerkey's one of the guys that he mainly trains with. You've seen him in the UFC. He's got a fight coming up. I know there's been a little bit of a Volkanovski connection as well, so that's interesting, especially in some of the lower weight classes. So, you know, Volkanovski bouncing around, mainly a city kickboxing guy, but not a New Zealand guy. All that to say, this is where it gets kind of funky fresh because Jourdain opened the -300 favorite. That line dropped really quick, and he's one of the biggest favorites on this card at -450. Culibao open +250, now at a +335. Over on Tapology at a 739 votes, 88% going with the Canadian, 75% saying he's going to win this one by knockout. I think he's got a really good shot in this one. I'm not going to go as far as saying a knockout, and I typically, it's weird, seem to pick against the Canadians, being a Canadian, but I am going all in Quebec here, and c'est le but for Charles Jourdain here.
I agree. I think he is going to score a big win over Josh Culibao. It's just, when you look at them and match them up stylistically, Culibao is going to have a big problem with the power of Jourdain. I just think as the fight progresses too, Jourdain is a good case of a guy who has big power, but he doesn't really get tired as the fight goes on. He is able to keep that power somewhat late into the fight because he has such good cardio. So it should be a fun fight for as long as it lasts, but I do think Jourdain, and maybe even by stop, it should be a good fight.
Matt, nous allons aller avec le Canadien. We're going with Charles Jourdain to get the win. I'm really looking forward to this card. This fight should be good. You got Court McGee And Carlos Condit, you're not going to miss that one and our extended look at the main event between Holm and Irena Aldana. Bantamweight bragging rights there. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it. This is one of the most interesting fights on the card, and it might seem a strange thing to say. We have the natural-born killer, Carlos Condit, former UFC interim welterweight champion, taking on Court the Crusher McGee. I mean, it seems like Court McGee was on The Ultimate Fighter forever ago. And here's the controversial thing that I'm going to say to start the video off. Court McGee holds a bigger win on his record than Carlos Condit does, even though Carlos Condit is a former UFC interim champ. Condit to win that beat Nick Diaz. That was a big deal back then. Court McGee has a win over Robert friggin' Whittaker.
Before he was champ.
How crazy is that? That's crazy. You never think that. But Court McGee, lately salty record. Carlos Condit, since he fought GSP, or including that GSP fight, he's 2-8 in his last 10. He's lost 5 in a row. And his last win was over 5 years ago over a good opponent. I mean, Thiago Alves, and I get it, BKFC's Thiago Alves, who actually has looked pretty good with BKFC. But Condit in his last 5, it kind of looks like the shell of the fighter that we came to love.
I'm going to go off for a second, Craig, so just hold on tight. No one, none of my friends, I've been trying to get my friends into MMA, and I'm trying to explain to them all these great fighters that they missed out on, and, trying to give them sort of a little bit of history lessons, just as, who they should know. And then my friends and I were going over this card, and they were like, oh, Carlos Condit, and they were just looking at his record, and they thought he was some scrub, and they didn't know why he fought in the UFC. But if you've been at this for a while, and if you like MMA, Carlos Condit is on First Team All Violence. I think it was Sean Al-Shadi that tweeted that out. If you're a new MMA fan and you've only been focusing on MMA for even the last 5 years, so you can even be a fairly hardcore fan at this point, you don't really know the story of Carlos Condit. At one point, you gotta look at the earliest part of his career. Submitting guys off his back, he can do triangle chokes, arm bars, he's this kind of, not a phenom on the ground, but he's finishing people off his back because he's such a good striker, people are trying to take him down. And I think he kind of fell in love with that, because then you look at his record as he's moving up the ranks. He's this phenomenal striker. He knocks out Stun Gun with that crazy double flying knee. He TKOs Rory McDonald in the 3rd round of their crazy fight. And then you can just feel it. It's like, okay, Carlos Condit, he's making his march towards the title. And then he fights Nick Diaz. And I understand it's a controversial fight. People like to say Diaz 1, 2, and 5. Carlos Condit won that fight. I don't care what anyone says. But Carlos Condit had, I'm going to call it now the Dominic Reyes effect, where you have your best performance of your career in a loss in a title fight against one of the greatest fighters ever. Carlos Condit beat the brakes off GSP. Here's the problem, though. GSP beat the brakes off Carlos Condit, too. It's one of the best fights you'll ever see in MMA history. But in the 3rd round where he lands a 1-2, almost freezes time, it seems, and then loops this big head kick around that smashes GSP in the head, has him hurt, drops him, and then Carlos Condit's going for the finish. It's like, oh, this is MMA at its peak. And that fight really did feel like, okay, you can't get better than these guys. You're just going to get different variations of these guys. And of course, MMA as a sport has grown a lot since then. But at least for that one night, it felt like there were two superheroes fighting each other, not to feel too cliche. Carlos Condit's not that guy anymore. And the problems that he had in the earlier part of his career are still the problems that he has now. He can't defend a takedown to save his life. And at least in WEC, or when he was fighting lesser competition, he does have the jiu-jitsu to finish people off of his back. But unless your name's Damian Maia, Fabricio Verdum, Brian Ortega, it's really hard to finish a fight with a submission off your back at high level, or in high level. Alexei Oleinik and Tony Ferguson. Those are pretty much the only 5 guys who should do anything in their guard, like Charles Oliveira. So you have to be this crazy high level grappler where that's not really what Carlos Condit's game is built around. His game's built around, I'm a really good striker. I don't have crazy power, but I've got really good volume. Things are coming from weird angles. I've got great elbows. I'm big for the division. I'm awkward. He has a lot of the X factors, but his game's sort of bare bones if you really think about it. And the chin and the cardio are 2 things that are probably never going to go away. The Robbie Lawler fight, it's wild that even after he lost to GSP, he got a title shot that a lot of people thought he won. I mean, the Robbie Lawler fight at UFC 195, another one of the greatest fights ever, where they beat the brakes off each other. And a lot of people thought Carlos Condit won, but when you're in fights like the Robbie Lawler fight, and when you're in fights like the GSP fight, they take something from you.
I mean, remember the Carlos Condit moment? He's had a Step Brothers moment where it was baseball bat on a golf club. I mean, they both threw hooks. One of them landed more flush than the other one, and Carlos Condit able to come out on the winning end. And like you said, I mean, this is a guy that's had like a remarkable career. He's going to be a Hall of Famer, I'm sure.
He's not. That's the sad part, but continue.
That's the sad thing. I mean, it's just this recent run. We're talking about a guy that's lost 5 in a row. The win over Thiago Alves, all right, it happened, but that was over 5 years ago. How's he going to fare with a guy like Court McGee? Well, I mean, it's been a gradual decline of opponent, and that's tough to say because it's good opponents. I mean, again, 5 losses ago, Robbie Lawler, 4 years ago. Then it's Damian Maia, he gets submitted. Then it's Neil Magny. Then it's Alex Oliveira, he gets submitted. Then it's Michael Chiesa, he gets submitted in that one. Now you get Court McGee. So you're going out of the rankings, and now it's Court McGee. But what's Court McGee good at? Wrestling and pressuring guys. And the trouble for Carlos Condit over his career, such a long body of work, if you want to look at the percentages, his takedown defense is at 36%. Court McGee, his accuracy is not great at 21%, but he just keeps going forward, keeps moving forward. So unless he gets caught by a strike, which I'm sure there's a large percentage of you that are going to say Carlos Condit's going to win by knockout, I just don't see that happening in this one. I really don't.
Here's my problem. It's a perfect fight for both guys at the stage of their careers because it's hard to deny Carlos Condit fights like you can with BJ Penn. BJ Penn, he just kind of got hit and wouldn't respond to it. Carlos Condit's losing his fights, but he's not completely out of them anymore. Like, I do think he can win a fight in the UFC. I think there's a guy in the welterweight division he can beat. There's at least one of them. And if that guy's Mickey Gall, then maybe it's only Mickey Gall. But BJ Penn, it's just at a certain point, it's okay, it's not competitive anymore. He's barely been throwing back. Condit's still doing the things that got him to the dance. It's just MMA in the last 7 years has gone and advanced so much that you can't be that one-trick pony anymore. And we can go through all of his wins, all of his losses. I thought he looked okay against Neil Magny at UFC 219 when he kind of made his comeback after his retirement from the Maia fight. But he was never able to really put it together after that. I thought, okay, you lose a somewhat close fight to Neil Magny, and then that can kind of get you back into it. That's going to knock the rest off, and you can start taking things seriously. The Brazilian Cowboy fight was good, but when Alex Oliveira is able to take you down and submit you, that's when I start to get concerned, and it's just kind of been one thing after another with Condit. Against my better judgment, I'm going to say he's going to win, though. I think he's going to win and retire. They gave him this fight on purpose. It's because Court McGee, yes, he's got good takedowns. He's a good grappler. And stylistically, he will give a lot of problems to Carlos Condit. But Carlos Condit's just kind of fighting for one more win, I think, so he can retire. I don't think he thinks he's going to become champ anytime soon. I don't think he's going to try to go on a title run, hashtag one more run like Alistair Overeem. I just think he wants to go out with a win, and I think the UFC almost wants to do it for him because he has been a company guy for so long.
So Court McGee.
For Court McGee, he was never the name Carlos Condit was. He never had the levels of success Condit did. And Court McGee's not very fast at this stage in his career. He is a little slower. His striking's quite labored. So if Carlos Condit is ever going to get a win, it would be right now. If he loses, though, this is it. I hope at least.
I agree with you. I think if he's going to get a win over anybody, it's probably going to be Court McGee. And a lot of the Tapology voters are agreeing with that sentiment. Out of 792 votes, 67% going with Condit, 80% predicting decision. And if you look at Court McGee, even in his last 5, that's where it gets interesting because he loses the decision to Ben Saunders. He loses the decision to Sean Strickland, who's a good striker. He beats Alex Garcia, a very good Cuban wrestler. And then he loses by split decision to Diego Lima and loses to Sean Brady by decision. Stuff like that's going to happen. But Court McGee, again, the takedowns, the pressure, and if he can do that against Carlos Condit, there's a very easy path to decision there. And that's where the odds makers are going because if you look at it in terms of the odds, they've shifted and continue to shift for Court McGee. He opened a plus 120 underdog. He's now minus 131 favorite. And if you look over across the cage at Carlos Condit, I mean, those odds have shifted from a minus 140 favorite to a plus 106 underdog, roughly, over on Best Fight Odds. So odds shifting towards McGee. Fan voting going towards Carlos Condit, which I'm sure it's always going to go towards Carlos Condit. I'm slightly going to edge Court McGee. I wouldn't say it's the most confident pick because it's either one of two things. Carlos Condit outstrikes Court McGee and wins a decision. I don't see him knocking him out. Or Court McGee just pressures, tries to wrestle, and gets Carlos Condit down. And Condit, maybe not the best fighter off his back, kind of the Luis Smolka effect that we like to talk about. And he's way too comfortable off his back where it used to work for him early on in his career where he's submitting guys, but now it's not. I don't see it working against Court McGee. But either way, it should be an interesting fight. It's your feature prelim. People are excited. Matt, you going to go with your guy?
Probably. Okay, so I had a good weekend last weekend. I can throw one of my picks away a little bit.
No, you can't.
Carlos Condit, I don't think he's going to finish Court McGee. I think he does one thing really well that can give Court McGee problems, though. If he does get taken down, and if he is on his back, let's say there's only 30 seconds left in the round, he initiates offense like Tony Ferguson off his back, where he will throw elbows and kind of cause some damage. We saw that in the Bisping GSP fight. He's one of the better guys at doing that, although I do believe it's a detriment as a total. If it's something that happens near the end of a round where he does get taken down, he can start to damage his opponent instead of looking to get back up. I'll pick a Carlos Condit, though. I think I'll catch Court McGee going in for a takedown if the strikes are too much for him, because I don't think Court McGee has that kind of explosiveness to just get a hold of Carlos Condit, take him down immediately. I think he is going to at least have to work for the takedown somewhat on the Carlos Condit level and make him work for the takedown somewhat. But I'm going to say Condit. I'm not confident at all with that pick, but I'm going to say Carlos Condit. Hopefully he can turn back the hands of time, end on a win. And I don't want to see him fight again whether he wins or he loses. Just kind of let him go off into the distance, fly away in a car like the end of Grease.
Matt going with the natural born killer. I'm going with the crusher. Ultimate Fighter, Court McGee. I'm really looking forward to this card. We got a lot of really interesting fights, including an extended look at our main event between the former bantamweight champ, Holm, looking to get back up the ladder, taking on Mexico's Irena Aldana. You're not going to want to miss that. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it. Really interesting fight at 205 pounds, Matt. We've got the tarantula Dequan Townsend trying to get back on the horse. He's lost all 3 fights so far in the UFC. He's taking on Serbia's Dusko Todorovic, and I'm really excited about this one. We've been waiting for Dusko Todorovic to make his UFC debut after getting a win over Teddy Ash from Contender Series in 2019. He picked up a really good unanimous decision win. He got hit in the clinch, and he looked really good in that fight. Over on the regional scene, to get him onto Contender Series, he had a great fight against Michel Pereira for the Serbian Battle Challenge middleweight title. He looked really good. It was weird because Pereira, we went back and watched that fight, it was pretty well subdued. Daniel Cormier would have liked that fight out of Michel Pereira, but unfortunate for Pereira, Todorovic just pushed the pace, got him up against the cage, landed at will. He could go to the body, he could go to the head. Really technical, but with a lot of pop in his shots. Yeah. And from his opponent, Dequan Townsend, I kind of buried it. But in the fight against Dalcha Champ, coming in from EFC, Dalcha Lujanbula won that fight overwhelmingly, finished it in the 3rd round. So Townsend didn't win any rounds in that fight at all. You could argue the 1st round, but he didn't. Then he came out from 205 to 185 against Bavon Lewis. Lost that fight handily at 85. So then on 2 weeks' notice, he comes back and fights Devin Clark at 205 pounds and loses every round in that fight too. So we haven't seen much out of Dequan Townsend. Haven't really gotten a full picture of the guy. He's long, has a ton of reach for either 85 or 205. In this one, though, I mean, at whether, if it's at 85, it's at 205 pounds. And I had it for Todorovic at 205 pounds. But, I mean, at 185 for both of these guys, this is a tough fight. I mean, it's got to be a tough weight cut for Dequan Townsend coming out of Michigan. And for Dusko Todorovic, I mean, a lot of people think the sky's the limit for this guy. And maybe you were a big Darko Stozic Serbian MMA fan and it didn't go his way at 205 pounds, but you can put all of your hopes and dreams on Dusko Todorovic at 185. Matt, what do you think of this one? Because the odds are quite far spread apart. I mean, Charles Jourdain our biggest favorite on this card, but Dusko Todorovic more than a 3-1 favorite here. What do you make of this one? And if Dequan Townsend's going to have success, what does he need to do in this fight?
He's going to put butter on the steps of the octagon, and Dusko's going to fall. No, it's not that one-sided. Dequan Townsend hasn't showed as much in the UFC, and it's unfortunate to say he's had a ton of fights, and a guy who's 21-11, he has the experience edge over a guy like Dusko, who is 9-0. There's all this hype behind him, but I don't see Dusko as this guy who's going to get, believe in his own hype and come into this fight as a diminished version of himself. But with Dequan, the fact that this fight's at 185 pounds, I know I'm not going to get the best version of him. We were saying before the video started. Justin Ledet is another guy who, when he made his transition from heavyweight down to 205, you just knew you weren't going to get the best version of him. And it showed in his performances. Like, you knew he was drained on his way to the octagon. Now, for Townsend, it doesn't seem like the weight cut is as dramatic to get to 185, but you can tell in his performances, like the Bavon Lewis fight, he just kind of seemed tired from the get-go. There was never a point where it's like, okay, I gotta get started. It was just like, okay, I'm in the fight, and it just felt like he was idling for a lot of it. The positives that we have seen out of his game, he does kind of utilize everything. He's well-rounded. He's going to be the much bigger of the two fighters going into this one, but Dusko, when you look at what he's able to do from a skill aspect, on the inside, he's quite a bit better than Dequan. He's got a wider array of strikes. He's got better footwork. He's got more speed. I'd argue Townsend probably has more just sheer power for one punch, but I think the skill and the athleticism of Dusko is really going to give Townsend problems, especially on the outside too. If you're fighting a guy who's really mobile and constantly moving, and you've always got to readjust your stance, readjust your feet to try to keep up with him, I just think that's going to wear on Townsend as the fight goes on. And we know if you cut a ton of weight, yes, it's a positive. You're going to be the bigger guy, but at a certain point, it's a huge negative where your cardio is just not where it should be. You're going to get drained a lot earlier, and I can kind of see this. I kind of see that going in this fight. I think Dusko is going to be able to get it done, but Townsend knows he's probably fighting for his UFC career. If there was ever a time to just put your foot on the gas and see what happens, this is it.
And it is an interesting fight for that fact that Dusko Todorovic, I mean, moves so well on the outside. He mixes in his kicks well with his punches and throws great combinations on the feet. And he can definitely land and drop guys. Again, you saw that in the Pena fight. You saw that on the regional scene from him. Again, it's unfortunate we had to wait over a year to get him back. I mean, he was booked against Captain John Phillips 3 times.
And when you look at Todorovic's last 2 fights, you could argue, yes, they weren't in the UFC, but they're kind of UFC wins. Like, Michel Pereira in the UFC, Teddy Ash, I mean, he's a pretty good fighter. Like, even though they weren't in the UFC when he got those wins, I would still qualify them as UFC caliber victories. That's all.
100%. So this is where it gets a little froggy. I mean, if you look over on Tapology, it has 720 votes, 91% going with Dusko Todorovic, 67% of those voters thinking he's going to win by knockout. He opened a minus 305 favorite, now at a minus 323 average on best fight odds. If you look over across the cage for Dequan Townsend, open plus 225. Now he's at a plus 252. I mean, you got to give an avenue of victory to Dequan Townsend. Unfortunate, too, what happened to his brother. If you want to go look into that one, maybe help him out over on GoFundMe. It's a shame. And you think the guy definitely has to get a win here. I can't side with Dequan Townsend in this fight. I'm going with Dusko Todorovic to get the win, move forward in the division, and he's an exciting breath of fresh air for MMA. I mean, I think he really has a pretty good ceiling. Might struggle with some of the better wrestlers, but we've seen it, especially in those last 2 and on the regional scene as well. He's an incredibly dynamic striker, and he's going to bring fireworks to a lot of his fights.
No, I couldn't agree more. I'm really high on him, too.
Matt, both of us going with Dusko Todorovic to get the win. You're not going to want to miss the rest of our predictions. Go back and check out the fight between Carlos Condit and Court McGee. Go forward and look at an extended look at our main event between Holm and Irena Aldana. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it. We are really excited about UFC debuts, and we have one for Cameron Else, Cam Cheetah, coming in here taking on Kyler Phillips on short notice, and he's replacing Dana Batgaril. And Matt, Kyler Phillips, when he came into the UFC, wasn't really so much that he came into the UFC, but when he came into the Ultimate Fighter, undefeated, people were really excited about Phillips. It's unfortunate because he ran into a buzzsaw on the guy that won the season, Brad Katona, who's oddly enough now competing with EMC for their Bantamweight Championship. The UFC dumped him like, I don't know, a bad girlfriend, I guess. It was weird how they just let Brad Katona go. But Kyler Phillips, so didn't work out all that great for him on the Ultimate Fighter. Then he lost the fight on the regional scene after that. Picked up a win, came into the UFC, and against Gabriel Silva, looked amazing. And I mean, what can I say about Gabriel Silva? He's forever going to be in the shadow of the prospect of his brother, Eric Silva. But Kyler Phillips looked great. His striking was fluid and dynamic. It was one of those Robin Black, he looks like he's swimming through fighting type of statements. But Kyler Phillips did actually look like that. And oh, by the way, grew his hair out. So there's that. For Cameron Else, bit of a question mark. Because if you go back 7 years ago on the regional scene, he had a submission win over Paddy Pimblett, which is crazy. Since then, he's fought salty contenders, and I have to say that because, you know, he loses to 10-7 Spencer Hewitt. Then he gets a win over a guy that's 2-1, loses to a guy that's 6-1, beats a guy that's 3-1, so on and so forth. And he's on a tidy little win streak, 6-fight win streak. Okay, pro debut, 1-1. Pro debut, 4-0, 0-1, 3-14. And he's finishing these guys, but it really makes me sit here and scratch my head. You're beating guys that have salty records, Cameron Else. Okay, well, last weekend we had a fight between Hadis Ibrahimov and Danilo Marquez. We said the same thing. Danilo Marquez, long periods of inactivity, he was beating salty guys, and he got a win over Hadis Ibrahimov, who looked tired from the jump. But Kyler Phillips is like a ball of energy, and he just keeps going and going and going. So can Cameron Else really bring things together? Can he bring that fast twitch, first round type of stoppage that we've seen him be able to do on the regional scene? I mean, he's representing, you know, Southwest USA, training out of the BMF ranch. There's a little bit of Jackson Wing peppered in there if you look on the Tapologies and the MMA forum guides and the Sure Dogs of the world. What is he going to bring into this fight? To me, he's way too big of a question mark. And oh, by the way, Kyler Phillips, one of the biggest favorites on this card. I know we mentioned Charles Jourdain was a big favorite, but right now, if you look at Kyler Phillips, he just continues to gain. He's a minus. He opened as a minus 275. That line dropped automatically. And Kyler Phillips is now a minus 441 average on best fight odds. Cameron Ellis open plus 235, now at a plus 332. This is a fight that I would totally avoid because of the unknown. Again, Cameron Ellis looks amazing against lower competition. Kyler Phillips hangs in there against some decent guys. He lost to Brad Katona on the Ultimate Fighter, and then on the regional scene, looking to pick up the pieces. He lost to Victor Henry, who was 14-4 by split decision at the time. I favor Kyler Phillips just like the odds makers do, but this is a fight that you stay away from. Really,
and you have to favor Phillips based on that silver performance alone because he did look so good, kind of reminiscent of Spike Carlisle sort of in his approach to that fight. And for Cameron Ellis, like you had mentioned, so many question marks. And when you're a guy, we see this a lot in the UFC where they'll have losses against people who are now in the top 15, but it seems like everyone that they beat wasn't in the UFC or only had one, maybe two fights that were both losses and they got cut. That's kind of what Cameron's record is outside the UFC. Great nickname in Camp Cheetah, kind of neat. But no, Kyler Phillips, his striking, absurd. He's got really good gas tank, great footwork, can strike from both sides too. So any guy coming in from the regional scene who has been fighting lesser competition is going to have a massive problem with Kyler Phillips because guys who have been in the UFC and who have UFC caliber wins are going to have a problem with Kyler Phillips. So not to let the cat out of the bag too early, but Kyler Phillips should be able to get this one done. He's a massive favorite for a reason.
I gotta say this off the record, behind or inside baseball type of thing that we do sometimes. If you go back and watch Cameron Ellis when he's fighting with Bama, and it's been a little bit because Bama hasn't totally been around for a long time. So I'm watching the fight against Jay Butler back in 2015. They said he was 29 years old then. So unless he's frozen in time and he's still 29, I looked it up on ESPN. I looked it up on every website I could find. It says that he's 29 years old. The UFC says that he's 29. I don't know if Bama made a mistake. I don't know if this guy's actually, 36 to this point? I have no idea. It's weird stuff. I figured I'd throw that one out there to make it interesting. But yeah, I'm going with Kyler Phillips.
Look into it.
You look over on Tapology out of 657 votes, 81% going Phillips, 54% saying he's going to win by decision, 35% saying he could win it by knockout. Again, way too much of the unknown, and I can't stress that one enough. But yeah, I'm going to go with the overwhelming favorite, Kyler Phillips here. Matt, you're in agreement?
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Both of us going with Kyler Phillips. It's a strange fight, especially if this fight's on the main card. I don't know what it is.
Carlos Condit was a champion, okay? Show him that respect. Put him on the main card.
I think it's a spotlight if either one of these guys get a spectacular win. But yes, both of us going with Kyler Phillips. You're not going to want to miss the prediction that we had a little bit ago for Carlos Condit, Court McGee, or maybe our featured fight at the top of the card, Holm taking on Irena Aldana at the top of the bantamweight division. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. I gotta say this now. We made it this far into the card, and maybe you're just tuning in for this prediction. Make sure you check out the rest of the playlist. I don't normally throw that one out there, but in this fight, we have Germaine de Randamie taking on Julianna Pena. It's an interesting fight. Julianna Pena has a great pedigree. She's a great grappler. She has really good wins on her record, too. I mean, Kat Zingano, Jessica Ai. We've seen a lot of really nice ones. She beat the former UFC flyweight champ, Nico Montano, in her last time out. The reason why I say this is weird, and Matt, you brought this up before we started. Germaine de Randamie's ranked as the #1 bantamweight in the division. Julianna Pena, #4. What are the rankings for our main event?
So Holly Holm would be ranked #2, and Irena Aldana is ranked #6.
So that's just really weird in terms of... This isn't even the co-main event. This is your, third to last fight. All that being said, the fact that Julianna Pena is ranked 4th is, again, more of a head-scratcher because... I get it, because I brought up those names. So she beat Kat Zingano over 4 years ago, and then she lost to Valentina Shevchenko. It's going to happen. Took a long time off, and then beat Nico Montano. Nico Montano is not ranked anymore in the UFC's bantamweight division. She was ranked near the bottom. Julianna Pena's only win since then. Again, 4 years ago over Kat Zingano. All of a sudden, you're ranked quite highly. Now, speaks incredibly well, has different commentating gigs with different organizations. I know she's spotlighted for Combate in the past. Germaine de Randamie, your inaugural UFC women's featherweight champ. She had to get that surgery on her hand. She couldn't fight. Really tough out in Chris Cyborg. And now picking up the pieces at 135 pounds. And what can you say about Germaine de Randamie, Matt? I mean, really, she lost her last fight out against Amanda Nunes. A lot of people, including the commentary team, thought that she was going to win that fight or gave her opportunities in that fight to win, which we do in our prediction
She got
videos.
taken down 1,000 times, though, and beat up.
It didn't go all that well. So if you're the camp of Julianna Julianna Pena, you're definitely going to be saying, hey, Pena's got to initiate the takedowns, really try and drag that fight to the mat, and she's a really good opportunity for a win. For Germaine de Randamie, there are fewer women in just MMA, let alone this division, that have a better kickboxing pedigree than Germaine de Randamie and are better strikers than Germaine de Randamie. And if you want to go back to a fight, because it wasn't that long ago, where, again, the fighter's got to take Germaine de Randamie down, got to really wrestle her.
Steal what I was getting.
Look at the fight against Aspen Ladd. Yeah. Matt, go.
So, in the Aspen Ladd fight, first of all, main event in the UFC women's bantamweight division, something that doesn't happen very often. I know we're getting it again this weekend, but just shout out to the ladies, I guess. Germaine de Randamie went out there, threw one right straight, knocked out Aspen Ladd, and spun her around.
Now, was it an early stoppage?
It was an early stoppage, kind of, but the fact that she hit her with one punch, took her off her feet, made her do a 180. I understand why a ref would jump in, but Germaine de Randamie's striking is on such another level, but she has the Carlos Condit problem. Her takedown defense is not good. We saw that in the Amanda Nunes fight. Now, I understand Amanda Nunes, she's the GOAT because, yes, her striking's absurd. She has this God-given power, but she's good at everything. Her wrestling's amazing. Her jiu-jitsu's phenomenal, and I think she's a better wrestler than Julianna Pena. Here's where it comes into kind of an interesting area. Pena's better on the mat than Amanda Nunes. I would argue her just straight jiu-jitsu, it's at least on par. They have a few similarities to their game, but I don't think it's just the wrestling or any of the physical advantages that Amanda Nunes has, because when you think, Amanda Nunes is massive for 135 pounds. She's big at 145, and she's even knocking out those fighters. So I don't know if Pena physically will be able to match up with de Randamie, so a lot of this is going to be taking place on the feet. Now, Germaine de Randamie, you had mentioned it, she's one of the best kickboxers just in the UFC, regardless of gender. She's one of the more credentialed kickboxers. She has big power for the division. She has good cardio, great elbows, great Muay Thai. Julianna Pena has to get this fight to the ground, and I just don't know how she's going to, because, again, she lacks that in-between. She has the good jiu-jitsu. Her striking's not terrible. But if this fight does have to take place on the feet for any period of time, and say what you want about hitting people after the bell, but de Randamie's going to light Julianna Pena up like a Christmas tree. If this does stay on the feet, I would give Pena the similar advantage on the ground. If she's able to somehow take down Germaine de Randamie, that's really where this fight kind of balances on, is the takedown defense of de Randamie and the takedown offense of Julianna Pena. Because if she can get the fight down to the ground, I think she could threaten with different submissions, get a lot of great ground and pound off herself, and make this a very interesting fight.
Germaine de Randamie so far in the UFC, 71% takedown defense. Not that bad considering the fights before Amanda Nunes. She took on Aspen Ladd, but ka-ching, you knock her out. And then the fight against Raquel Pennington. And for Pennington, I would think, again, similar game plan. You're getting Raquel Pennington is more well-rounded than, a few of the different fighters that we mentioned. But like you said, well-rounded, a grinder, and she can bring things down to the mat if she needs to. It hasn't happened for her all that recently, but good win over Marion Renault. But in this fight, if you look at it in terms of the votes over on Tapology, 847 votes, 75% going to Randamie, 58% of voters saying she's going to win by decision, 34% saying she could win by knockout. If you look over at the odds, they're close. de Randamie opened a -185. That line jumped up really quickly on Pena. She's now gaining back down again. So at one point, actually, Pena was slightly favored. Now, de Randamie back to a -135. If you look over at Pena, again, +160. At one point, she was -125. And now Pena back up again, +110. So I think it is an interesting fight. If Pena goes in there quick and early while everybody's still dry and we haven't expended too much energy, she gets de Randamie down. Maybe she has a chance to submit her. I just don't totally see it in this fight. I think the step up from Montano being the comeback fight to Germaine de Randamie, it just is. It's way too big of a step up. It's kind of a bit of a head scratcher. Same as the rankings, but again, the UFC rankings don't make any sense. Look at Dustin Poirier is ranked higher in the pound-for-pound rankings than Justin Gaethje, just arbitrarily. So look into it. But yeah, I see Germaine de Randamie winning. The kickboxing, again, the striking acumen. I think it's her fight to lose here.
Sprawl and brawl. Germaine de Randamie didn't invent it, but it's definitely going to be her game plan. If you can defend the takedowns of Julianna Pena, force her to become a striker, it's going to make your night a lot easier. Because not only is Germaine de Randamie such a good striker, Julianna Pena's striking is quite limited because her grappling is so good. So if you can make this a striking exchange, de Randamie should be able to run away with this fight.
Matt, really looking forward to this. Both of us going with the fighter from Utrecht, the Netherlands, Germaine de Randamie. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We've got an extended look at our main event between Holm and Irena Aldana. And as we always say, Matt, let's get into it. Matt, how this is the co-main event of anything is an absolute just head scratcher. It doesn't make any sense. We have unranked heavyweights, and normally you kick off a prelim card, or it's the second or third fight on the prelims, and either this fight or just unranked heavyweight or light heavyweight fights in general are bangers, or they're the worst fight on the card, and that's probably what you're going to get here. You get a performance bonus, or you could get a terrible fight. It's like going Easter egg hunting, and instead of an Easter egg, your kid picks up a piece of dog. So it's one of those two things. And in this fight, I scratched my head because for Yorgan Castro on the regional scene, when he became a pro, you thought, what are you going to get? Because as an amateur, we were losing against not great fighters. We were beating not so great fighters. Had the chance to cover his fight where he won the NEF Cruiserweight title over Bellator's Ross Hilton. And since then, really kind of leveled out. His UFC debut overseas, he takes on Justin Tafa, who was more or less the hometown guy in that fight. Huge fight at Marvel Stadium, knocks him out, looks amazing. And his last time out for Yorgan Castro didn't go his way. Now, he took on Greg Hardy. He was the underdog in that fight, and a lot of people thought DeCastro had a good shot. I remember the comments back then. But it seemed like DeCastro got hurt, and then after the first round, it was like he kind of went on cruise control if cruise control took you nowhere. Like, it was weird.
You know how Paul Felder once broke his arm and kept on fighting? And, like, there's a lot of fighters who do it. Like, Dominic Reyes broke his nose, but he kept on fighting until he got knocked out. Yorgan Castro, I'm sure he had a serious injury, but it was just a weird thing to happen in the fight. He was throwing the calf kick, everything seemed normal, he was having a lot of success, and they just kind of threw one, and he didn't really, like, limp around or anything. He just kind of stopped throwing them, or really any strike in that case. His volume really dropped. That's the bad part about Yorgan Castro. He has good speed for the heavyweight division. You had mentioned he has a career at cruiserweight, which is something that a lot of guys don't have in MMA.
But yeah.
But still, he at least can make that weight where a lot of guys, like Francis Ngannou could never be a cruiserweight, but Yorgan Castro, big speed advantage over most guys. He has good strikes. He's in that weird kind of category where you don't have huge knockout power, but you're not a volume guy. You're a heavier handed sort of volume striker. And it puts him in a weird category. He's sort of not in a class of his own because there's other guys there, but it's an awkward place to be at because you can't fight at this, okay, I'm just going to go out, try to use my power, knock him out with one shot, because you're going to get clipped yourself in a lot of those cases. And we saw that in the Justin Tafa fight. He had his back up against the cage. Tafa just kind of rushed at him, and he one-punched him Mark Hunt style and walked off. I don't think that's going to be the story of his UFC career for the most part, but he does offer at least good stand-up, good Muay Thai, good speed for the division.
The nice thing, too, and you brought it up, I mean, he threw that kick and he just kept going to the well against Greg Hardy. It was similar to the fight against Alton Meeks on Contender Series, where he just kept throwing that to the point where he really hurt Alton Meeks, and that was all she wrote. So it was weird in that fight against Greg Hardy. Hopefully that wasn't a one-off for Yorgan Castro, a guy representing Cape Verde. We don't see a lot of fighters there, but Fall River, Massachusetts, as well as where you're billing Yorgan Castro out of. Now on the opposite side, Carlos Felipe. I was really hard on Carlos Felipe when we broke down his fight against Sergey Spivak, because I watched an interview where he said, yeah, I've been at home during quarantine in Brazil. I brought a couple of heavyweight fighters over. We've been training at home. So I went over to the Instagrams. They had a mat. They were training. His fight against Sergey Spivak, I know one of the judges scored at 28-28, but it was pretty well all Spivak to a point.
Pretty underwhelming.
And, you know, a lot of people were high on Carlos Felipe. Now, you can get excited again in this fight because he's going to be able to at least showcase some of his striking. Trouble is, I mean, Felipe, he's got that reach advantage. It's slight, but he can get pushed up against the cage. He does have really good crisp boxing. You saw that on the amateur scene. This is a guy that he popped with USADA, and then he wasn't in the UFC, but he's back again. I'm not overly high on poor Carlos Felipe. I mean, cards on the table.
How you really feel.
It's a shame. It really is, because this is a guy, again, on the regional scene that was really exciting, and he's only 25 years old. We go back and look at the last 5 fights. His win over Pedro Mendes 4 years ago. And then he beat Wagner Maya 5-0. Then he beat Isaiah Silva. This is 3 years. 5 months ago, he was 2-0. Then he beat Sandro Bezerra, and that was 3 years and 4 months ago. So hypothetically, he would have been about 22 years old making his UFC debut. The USADA stuff, injuries, whatever. Then he comes out 2 months ago and loses to Sergey Spivak. Now, Spivak's a totally different fighter than Yorgan Castro. Spivak has the Sambo in his background, a win over Tony Lopez, regional star. So Spivak had all of that and, you know, a box of Wheaties with Anthony Pettis on the front. So Spivak had a little bit of shine, or at least I made some up for him. He won the fight. Carlos Felipe has the boxing. He can really throw nice combinations, and if he can push the pace, he has good distance management, which is something that you're going to need against a guy in Yorgan Castro that height and reach and whatever stat I threw onto the graphic there, he's a smaller heavyweight. He really is. I mean, he's a guy that people liken to like a Duran win or pick your fighter where if he cut some weight, he could probably fight at the lower weight classes. You talked about it, the fact that he has that fight from cruiserweight. It's an interesting fight because, again, you have strikers that do it in different ways. How do you ultimately see this one?
I mean, speed kills, and not only the drug, because it does, but like speed in MMA is probably the most important attribute to have. I think it's more important than power. I think it's more important than really anything. It matters, can you hit your opponent, yes or no? Yorgan Castro is going to be able to do that. I know he's got decent footwork when he doesn't break his feet. I know he has good power. He has that good hand speed too. He does get his head off the center line when he throws, which is important. It's something that a lot of guys don't do, especially outside of ranked contenders. Just little intangibles like that can win or lose you the fights at that. So I think the Mad Titan, not a great nickname, but Yorgan Castro should be able to get the win.
So if we look over in Tapology quickly at the total votes, out of 810, 87% going with Yorgan Castro, 83% predicting him to win by knockout. The line on De Castro open a minus 270. People hit that line quick. He was all the way down to a minus 340. Now it's come back up quick, but leveled off for De Castro. So at this point, minus 265 favorite. If you look at Carlos Felipe, open plus 230, now at a plus 212. Matt, I'm sticking with Yorgan Castro on this one. I mean, either it's going to be a quick first round knockout or the worst fight you've ever seen. So, yep. Oh boy, just check out the rest of the playlist. We're both going with Yorgan Castro to get the win. You're not going to want to miss our extended look at our main event between Holly Holm and Irena Aldana. Top bantamweight bragging rights. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. We have a top bantamweight pairing at the top of this card from Fight Island as the former UFC bantamweight champ, Preacher's daughter, Holly Holm, looking to get another win and add to the conversation that maybe she should fight for a title once more against Amanda Nunes. And she's taking on Mexico's Irena Aldana, who's absolutely on fire. Matt, since Aldana's been in the UFC, you might not think it, but I mean, she had a tough out her first two times. I mean, it's tough to beat Leslie Smith, who's in the top 3 for strikes landed per minute in the UFC, which is crazy to think of. Bellator's Leslie Smith. Then she loses a split decision to Caitlin Chookagian, which Chookagian, the queen of split decision wins and losses.
The female Czech Congo, some have said.
That wasn't great for Irena Aldana. So she comes back, beats Talita Bernardo, beats Lucia Pudzilova in a really fun fight, beats Betch Kohea, boing.
Breaks off her.
Loses split decision to Raquel Pennington, which was a tough one. So she goes back out, beats Vanessa Melo. That means absolutely nothing. I mean, Irena Aldana, to me, is actually a really, really good fighter. Vanessa Melo, it has not gone Melo's way in the UFC. So Aldana goes from beating Vanessa Melo to taking on the number 2 contender at the time in Ketlin Vieira. And if Vieira had gotten a win, it was title or game over for Vieira. Aldana goes out there. They put on a clinic as long as it lasted. Vieira had the kind of like wrist action where she'd throw the shot and kind of hit her, but there wasn't a ton of pop at the end. And Irena Aldana had pop.
Yeah, she started training with Canelo Alvarez before that fight, I guess.
They both went through hooks at the same time. Aldana's landed quicker and dropped Vieira, and man, that really cemented. Maybe there was a shot for Aldana at the time. Hey, title shot. She said it in the post-fight interview. I want a title shot. And she had to wait. Now she gets Holly Holm. It's kind of weird.
So, Irena Aldana should hate Amanda Nunes, and this is the only reason why. If Amanda Nunes is a bigger star, Irena Aldana would be fighting her already. Because this is what the UFC is doing. Aldana, does she deserve the title shot over Holly Holm? Of course she does. You're not getting an argument from me. Holly Holm has not been good as of late, really ever since she won the title. Inconsistent, I should say. Aldana is fighting Holly Holm because if she beats Holly Holm, this is exactly the Peter Yan, Jose Aldo fight. He should have fought Sterling, but if you beat Aldo, you get Aldo's fans, and then you can fight Sterling, and then it's going to be a bigger fight. If Aldana beats Holly Holm, you're beating the other legend that's still in the sport, not named Cyborg, because of course she's gone. Misha Tate's retired. Rousey's gone. So you really only have Holly Holm, Amanda Nunes, and that's it from like the glory days of the bantamweight division. Everyone else has either moved down in weight or retired. So if you can beat Holly Holm, not that you're going to, just absorb all of her fans, but that's another big name that you can then bring and say, okay, I beat Holly Holm. I've knocked out your former number 1 contender. I deserve the title shot. And hopefully that can kind of boost the I guess, underwhelming pay-per-view numbers of Amanda Nunes. That's the only reason they're making this fight.
The most interesting part about this, because, you know, you talk about fights being a clash of styles. This definitely isn't that. You know from Irena Aldana, that boxing background that she has. But, oh, by the way, and I know they're going to play on this in the broadcast, Holly Holm, former boxing champ, she comes into MMA, more of a kickboxer because you see that combination, the high kick, and then you have the 1, 2, 3, and she just goes to the well, goes to the well. Interesting wrinkle in her game, and we've seen it, maybe not as of late, I would say, but after the Chris Cyborg fight, so at least 2 years ago, she goes into the Megan Anderson fight. Most people thought Megan Anderson, a lot of hype behind her from Invicta. Holly Holm's probably not going to win that one. What did Holly Holm do? She starts going for the takedowns, and she, since the Cyborg fight, and even in the Cyborg fight, the clinch work from Holly Holm, she's really pushed more into her opponents, and we've seen more of a progression of her game where she's not just a boxer, a kickboxer, just a pure striker. She's added different things in, especially at 38 years of age now. That's a really interesting wrinkle to that game.
I'm about to hit people with a hot take. Holly Holm is not what I would consider an exciting fighter for the most part. Some of the finishes in her fights do result in exciting finishes, but the fights themselves aren't that exciting. When you really think of Holly Holm fights, they're kind of clinch heavy. There's not that much volume being thrown. She has power, but a lot of her power is, okay, I'm drawing people into my shots. And when you look at who she's actually been able to stop in MMA, Betch Correia.
There's nothing better than this.
My point is, Holly Holm's a really good striker, but she's not a power puncher or even a power kicker. You just have to look at who she was able to finish. She fought Marion Renault to a split decision before she fought for the title. Like, she's someone who had close fights, or split decision with Raquel Pennington. Had a close fight with Marion Renault, though. These fights all went to decision. Then she knocked out Ronda Rousey. Kind of got labeled as, oh, she's this wicked striker. It's not that I don't think... Holly Holm is a good striker, but being a better striker than Ronda Rousey doesn't put you in like that god tier of, oh wow, they're this really phenomenal striker. I don't think she's good at striking as Germaine Randamie. I don't think she's good at striking as Amanda Nunes. I think there's people out there who are better than her at her specialty. The only issue is Irena Aldana is not that person. And this is why Irena Aldana should hate Amanda Nunes for not being a big draw. Aldana is going to be a harder fight for Nunes than Holly Holm, but I don't think she's ever going to be able to fight Amanda Nunes, because Holly Holm's just going to frustrate her to no end in this fight. If they're at range and if Irena Aldana is starting to do well, Holly Holm's just going to clinch her up. She's the much bigger fighter. She's more physically strong. Now, Aldana might be the taller, but out of the two, Holly Holm's going to be able to get those double underhooks, pressure up against the cage, and not that Holly's going to be winning the fight, but she's not going to let Aldana win moments. And again, I'm talking in riddles right now, but if you watch enough MMA, you can kind of see that pattern where, okay, I'm not going to do an awful lot, but I will prevent you from making any moves or doing anything significant. I think Holly Holm's really going to have to slow this fight down. I think she's going to have to try to get rid of the movement of Aldana. Even though Holm's not a big leg kicker, I think she's going to go to the body a lot to try to, wear on that gas tank, wear on that cardio of Aldana. 5-round fights, now yes, she had them in Invicta, but 5-round fights for the most part are new to Irena Aldana. Holly Holm's basically only ever done 5-round fights in the UFC, really ever since the Rousey fight, because she's such a big name. It's hard to give Holly Holm just a regular fighter. So as much as it would be nice to see Irena Aldana, get the big win, move up, and offer Amanda Nunes sort of a new challenger, it's an uphill battle, and it's a really hard fight to win because I don't see her knocking out Holly Holm, because Holly Holm moves her feet really well, whereas Ketlin Vieira in her last fight that she won by knockout doesn't really move her feet all that well. We saw that in the Eubanks fight.
Yeah, it is an interesting matchup, and I mean, Matt, you seem to think that it's going to be a frustrating one. Holly Holm wins, and then there's going to be a conversation and debate as to whether or not she deserves a title shot. Holm right now open to -110. She's now at a -120 favorite. You look at Aldana, same thing. Pick 'em odds at the open. Now she's a -103, 105 on best fight odds. You have a look over on Tapology at 858 total votes, 59% going with Holly Holm, 78% saying that she's going to win by decision. If you look at it for Aldana, 70% of the 41% that picked her say she's going to win by decision. So in terms of Aldana, again, we know how good the striking is. She throws those nice hooks from range. She can dirty box in close. Holly Holm does everything just about the same. She'll throw in a little bit more in terms of the kicking. And you would think that, again, the clinch work and just the overall frustration would favor Holly Holm. This fight originally supposed to take place in early August. Aldana out due to a positive COVID test. So, in terms of this fight and what it presents, again, Irena Aldana, she's going to win. Glimmers of, wow, she looks like she could be She could beat Amanda Nunes, let's say. Her striking's so good, this and that. Maybe she offers up
She could
a moment.
Masvidal, Ben Askren, Holly Holm, and I wouldn't think she beats Amanda Nunes.
Yeah, it's tough. And Holly Holm, frustrator. I think you're probably going to get the latter. You're going to get Holly Holm frustrating Irena Aldana. It might not be the most confident pick. Again, it's more of a coin toss because it's going to be one of the two, and a lot of people are going to be really high on Irena Aldana, and I'm one of those people. I just think that Holly Holm, again, where we've seen her excel in fights against strikers like this, I'm just going to push a pace. I'm going to push them back, and I'm really going to eliminate the tools that they have and the things that they do well. And, I mean, yeah, she lost to Randamie, she lost to Shevchenko, she lost to Miesha Tate. Those things are going to happen. She beat Megan Anderson. She beat Raquel Pennington. It's tough. It's a tough pick, but I have it for Holm.
So, for the division's sake, it would be nice for Aldana to win. Again, parity in the division. You have a new title challenger who can offer a few new questions to the answer. That is Amanda Nunes. But Holly Holm's going to be able to win this. Again, no matter what range the fight takes place at, Holly Holm's got the deterrent. She can use her kicks from the outside. She is the longer of the fighters. She's the bigger of the fighters. She can use her clinch game. She has decent takedowns, although I don't really see her using them. I still would give her the edge in the wrestling. But it should be an entertaining, hopefully, main event. I'm just really curious to see. This is more of a fight to see if Aldana can get over the hump. If she can go from that contender to a challenger status. Because right now, a lot of people see her as, she's got really good skills. But when she does fight the upper echelon, she tends to lose. And Caitlin Chookagian, I know she's not the upper echelon at bantamweight, but kind of a similar fight for her. You're going to be fighting a fighter who's similar to Chookagian, but who can hit you harder. I just don't see it going for Aldana. It would be nice, but I think Holly Holm's going to win probably by decision.
I'm going to throw one more thing in there and really hit this from every angle. If you look at UFC stats, and we have enough tape on both fighters and enough input that you can look at it, Irena Aldana actually leads in almost every statistical category. She's got better takedown offense at 50% compared to Holm's 27%. She's got better takedown defense at 97% versus Holm's 76%. In terms of striking, 6.16 given for Aldana per 15, or per minute rather, to 2.75 for Holm. Holm actually has a negative striking differential by 0.05. Aldana has a positive, but she takes more. So it's 5.92 taken per minute to 2.8 for Holm. The defense percentage is actually higher for Aldana at 67% to 57% for Holm. And the percentage given is actually better for Aldana, 3% better than Holm's at 38 to 35. So every statistical category leaning Aldana's way, but has she taken on the same level of competition Holm has lately? No, that's the trouble. So it's a frustrating fight. And being the frustrated guy that I am at the end of this card, that if I had to give it a letter grade, it wouldn't be a high one. I'm going to go with Holm. You're going to go with Holm.
Oh, yeah.
But overall, there are glimmers of hope in this one. There's interesting fights, and there's things to look forward to. Dusko Todorovic making the UFC debut.
It's going to be exciting.
There's good fight. I mean, Jourdain's taking on Josh Culibao on the undercard. That's interesting. And you've got Carlos Condit taking on Court McGee. So head back into the playlist. Check out some of those videos. The individual videos out soon to a place near you. Probably YouTube, because that's where they're dropped. And then new merch as well, fightnightpicks.net. Make sure you check that out. If you made it this far, we certainly appreciate you. Check out Question Mark Kicks on Saturday. We're both going to be there. Matt has a prediction MVP trophy from the weekend. He beat me for once, which is never going to
happen often.
Never going to happen again. As we always say, Matt, with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.